president of the Metro Detroit Book and Author Society, and I want to welcome you to this very special event in our summer reading program, summer series. So for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I just want to give a quick introduction to the Book and Author Society. It's a nonprofit organization that promotes reading, books, authors, and literacy. And we do this via our virtual programs and the grants that we give to libraries and other literacy organizations. And we hope that you will follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and stay in touch with us because we have a lot of great events throughout the year, and we would love to have you back. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at bookandauthor.org. So today, I'm so excited. We have a great program for you in honor of all the summer reading programs at libraries everywhere. And we have one of our favorite children's book authors with us, Kelly DiPucchio. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Kathy. It's great to be here this afternoon.
You are our first children's book author that we've had on our program. So exciting.
Well, that's good. And then you have nobody to compare me to. So
the bar is set high for you. I mean, you're going to set the bar very high. And speaking of high bars, we also have a very special guest interviewer today, Jen Taggert, who is the Assistant Department Head of Youth Services and an absolute rock star in the world of children's services. And she is Assistant Department Head at the Bloomfield Township Public Library. So welcome, Jen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Kathy.
So we're really glad to have both of you here today, and we can't wait to hear your conversation. But I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping details, and I also want to give a special shout out to our partner bookstore, The Book Beat in Oak Park, Michigan. They have many of Kelly's books in stock, and you can buy them in the store or purchase them online. And we'll talk more about that towards the end of the program, but I do want to let you know that, after listening to Kelly and Jen, you're going to want to go out and read and probably have in your own home library Kelly's books. So just know that they're available for you at the Book Beat. So for everyone in the audience, I want to let you know that you are absolutely welcome to ask questions. We want you to ask questions. We're looking forward to your questions because I know a lot of kids are signed up, and this is your chance to talk to the person who writes your favorite books, and that's really cool. So get those questions ready, and if there's something that you want to know, you can type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you need a little help with that, just ask whoever's around and maybe they can do it for you. So the way that this works is Jen and Kelly are going to chat for a little while, and then we will dive into the questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen and Kelly, and can't wait to hear what you talk about. So have fun.
Thanks, Kathy. All right. So I'm excited to be here with you today, Kelly. I want to give a little bit of an intro to everybody about you. So Kelly is an award-winning author of over 30 children's books. 2 of her books, Grace for President and The Sandwich Swap, one of my absolute favorites, they were New York Times bestsellers. And let me see what I learned about Kelly. She had a pet goat when she was younger, as one does. And and like most teens growing up in the 1980s, including me, she had feathered hair and large glasses. And, as one does. And Kelly and her husband and 3 children live in Michigan. Yay! So today she's going to talk about a couple of her recent titles, including Una and Not Yeti. And she's also going to share a reading from Una. So let's get started here. So Kelly, you have written so many children's books. Why did you become a writer?
Well, I've always been a big reader. Ever since I was a little kid, I loved books, and it never occurred to me growing up that I could grow up to be an author. That just seemed like this big fancy career that only happened to people who lived in like New York or Los Angeles. And, I was just a regular kid growing up on a small farm in Rochester, Michigan. And I really didn't dare to dream that big. So it wasn't until many, many years later, after I had my own children, I had gone to college. I went to Michigan State. I had a degree in child psychology. I worked in the foster care system. So I had like many different careers and incarnations before I became a children's author. But like I said, it wasn't until I had my own 3 kids and I was, reading a lot of books to them that I rediscovered picture books, and I just fell in love with them. It'd been a long time since I'd read them. So I was kind of rediscovering the genre through my own children. And that's kind of when I first got the idea, like, I wonder if I could do this. So yeah, that was a long time ago. My kids are adults now. I'm actually a grandma now.
Yes.
That's one thing I need to do is update my bios, because it's the one thing I hate to write is my own bio. So it's painfully out of date, but I do still have the big glasses and pretty much the feathered hair. That hasn't really changed. But yeah, the first book I ever published was way back in 2004, and it was a book called Bed Hogs. And it was inspired by my young children at the time. They were rotten, horrible, lousy, no good sleepers, and they were always waking up at night. And so they inspired my very first children's book, Bed Hogs, illustrated by Howard Fine. Yeah.
Awesome. So speaking of inspiration, so you have written about so many different types of characters, from pigs to cupcakes to zombies to yetis. I mean, so many different types of characters. So you mentioned your children were inspirations.
Mm-hmm.
Did anything else inspire any of these other characters that you've written about?
Oh, for sure. And I always tell kids when I go into schools and talk to them about, you can find story ideas really anywhere. And I really and truly do. I mean, I wrote a book years ago called What's the Magic Word? And it's about a little bird who hatches from an egg during a windstorm. And that pretty much happened from this window here, looking out my window. And so, yeah, a lot of the stories are inspired by people I meet, or something a story that I might come across in the news, or just something that I see. So yeah, a lot of the inspiration just comes from things that I see or hear, really. I wrote that book, Everyone Loves Bacon, which is a really silly story, but that was inspired by actually my book, Zombie in Love. I was doing research on zombies, which, don't you love my job?
Absolutely.
I came across this webpage of this place that was selling all this zombie merchandise. And they actually had a page called Zombies and Bacon, which is a weird combination. But it was all these weird bacon things, like bacon Band-Aids and bacon toothpaste and bacon candy and socks and all this really weird stuff. And so I just was like, what's up with bacon? Everyone loves bacon. I'm like, wait a minute, everyone loves bacon. Has anyone ever written a picture book starring a piece of bacon?
I love it.
And turns out nobody had. So yeah, you can find story ideas pretty much anywhere. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a great idea, but that one actually turned out to be a pretty funny story.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask you a very important question here. I know a lot of kids want to know this. Do you have any pets at home?
You probably saw one just come in the door here. That was Pearl. I learned a long time ago from doing these virtual events that I have to keep my office doors open, because if I shut them, then they have to be in here. And so then you will see them jumping up on the door and pawing to get in. So if I keep the door open, they kind of come and go, and they don't generally disturb me unless a dog happens to walk by outside, and then you will hear that. But yes, I have 3 dogs now. So I have since pretty much replaced my children with dogs.
As one does.
So I have Pearl, and I have Finley, and then I have Lewis. So yeah. But yeah, growing up, I had all kinds of, she's now going to bother me for her treat, because she knows that she can blackmail me into treats.
Absolutely.
But yeah, growing up on a farm in Rochester, like, I did have a pet goat, and we had rabbits and chickens, and I had a horse. And so a lot of the books that I've written are about animals, because I'm a big softie when it comes to animals, and I love animal stories.
Sure. Okay. So what about, so some of your newer stories,
Mhm.
so one of the latest stories that you wrote about is about a mermaid.
Mhm.
So how did that come to be?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. So not all stories, all of my books that are published are my own ideas. Una is actually a character that was created by the illustrator, Riza Figueroa, and she had created this mermaid, and it was on her Instagram page, and for this thing called May. It's for where artists feature mermaids during the month of May, and so she had created this little mermaid, and she got a lot of attention, and an editor saw this character and just fell in love with the character, but there was no story. So I was asked if I could create a story for this character. And that's happened actually a few different times in my career with a few different books. Let me think. Superman He Stands Up is another book that I wrote that was started with the art first. So basically then my job is to, really look at the character and just kind of wait for them to speak to me. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but that's kind of how it works. And so that's what I did. And the first version of this book is very different than the version that I will be reading to everyone in a little bit. In the first version, it was kind of a very different story where she had parents, and it was kind of more like a Fancy Nancy type of story, I guess I would compare it to. And my editor read it, and she's like, that's good, but she's like, I feel like it's missing something. And so I started completely over, which kids out there, sometimes that happens with writing and in your assignments. Like if it's not working, sometimes it's really hard to start over, but that's what I did. I started completely over, and it became a whole new story. And so I really love what happened in this version. And it's funny because you'll hear me say Una missing her spark in this one. And so it's kind of, I brought that into the story. And so, so it was created actually by the illustrator. So that's another thing I probably should have pointed out earlier, that I am the author of all the books and I do not illustrate. We can talk a little bit more about that maybe in a bit, but I write all the stories, and I can kind of sort of draw, but I can actually show you something from my childhood that I drew and illustrated. So
yeah, we would love to see that.
Do you want me to show you now?
Absolutely.
Okay, let me go back to Una, because I know kids probably want to hear a story. That's probably why they're here today. But a lot of the projects and artwork that I did when I was a kid ended up getting damaged in when our basement flooded. Some people out there might be able to relate to that. Now, the rain we've had this summer, right? But this was actually saved, and you can see how it has water damage on it.
Oh no!
But it was a comic series that I created. I was in 6th grade, and it's called Vegetable Hospital, and it was inspired by the soap opera General Hospital, which
I love
still on television today. But I created all these different characters. There's, all this drama going on, and there's a banana who's in the hospital, and then the pickles have triplets, and there's a plane crashing, and there's just all this soap opera stuff going on in this comic strip series
with vegetables.
With vegetables and fruits. And so it's kind of funny that, later I went on to, write books like Everyone Loves Cupcake, because you can kind of see that. But so, I could draw. When you see these pictures, I had a pretty good handle on art, but when I got to middle school and I started taking art classes, I got really intimidated by my peers, and I started to look at, what they were drawing, and I was comparing myself, and I convinced myself that I couldn't draw, because I like to do humorous art. That was where I loved and where I shined. But, so when it came time to draw like a bowl of fruit, I wanted to give them eyeballs and smiles and make them talk. And that really wasn't the assignment. So I had kind of talked myself out of the idea of becoming an artist. And so, but I always share that story with kids too, because I know kids out there, you guys love things, maybe it's art isn't your thing, but maybe it's music or it's dance or it's sports. And it's really important not to compare yourself to other kids and just stick with what you love, because if I had done that, then maybe I would have grown up to be an author and an illustrator, right? So that's my little spiel for art and sticking to what you love.
Absolutely. So speaking of discovering what you are really good at, so why don't you share Una with us so that we can discover what Una is good at?
Okay, well, I would love to do that. So, of course, here's the beautiful cover. And as I mentioned, the illustrator is Riza Figueroa. And she actually lives in California. A lot of people are always surprised when they find out, that the illustrators aren't in Michigan. We don't go to the coffee shop together and brainstorm these books. A lot of times I don't even meet the artists. I've met a handful of them, of course, over the years, but yeah, so it's a very different process. I write the story generally first, and then the illustrator will get a copy of the manuscript and do the art. And so, but she, of course, this one, as I told you, started with this little character sketch of the mermaid. So this is the story, Una. Una was sweet and a little bit salty, like the ocean where she lived. She was also brave and curious, like most treasure hunters. When Una was just a baby, no bigger than a scallop, she chased a pearl into the mouth of a whale. Lucky for her, she popped right back out. As the years passed, Una found bigger treasure and even bigger trouble. It's a good thing she has Otto. Otto is an otter. Una rescued Otto from an oyster net when he was just a pup. She taught him tricks like sit, roll over, walrus, and her favorite, pufferfish. Can you make a pufferfish? Una and Otto searched for treasure nearly every day. They uncovered keys and coins and buttons and bottles. And sometimes they even found lost gold and sometimes lost glasses. Ha. But there was one special treasure Una could never quite reach. The crown. It was extra sparkly in a way that made Una's heart thump. But the crown was stuck deep in the rift, and not a pole or a pail or the sticky stick of a snail could get it unstuck. Still, Una was determined. Her next plan was a good one. She'd knock the crown loose. Unfortunately, the current shifted, the lobster crate and rock drifted, and the squid, well, see for yourself. What do squids do? They spray their ink, right? Like an octopus? It's hard to say who was more surprised when the water cleared, Una or the shark. Her third plan most definitely would have worked if the crabs hadn't been so crabby and the waves hadn't been so wavy, and if that long ship plank hadn't bumped her on the head hard before the greedy rift gobbled it up too. Poor Una. This was getting personal. She shouted into the pit, "You can keep your dumb crown. I quit." Generally speaking, mermaids are not quitters. But at this point, one could hardly blame her. See her looking so defeated there? Instead of looking for treasure with Otto, Una napped on the rocks with the sea lions. She drew pictures in the sand with the starfish, and she read from her favorite glass bottles with her land friends. All of this would have been perfectly fine, except Una wasn't perfectly fine. Clearly, she was missing her spark. And a mermaid without her spark is like a seagull without an appetite. Unnatural, right? Seagulls like to eat. A seashell washed ashore. Una studied it thoughtfully. It gave her an idea. She got right to work. The next day, Una peered nervously into the rift. Why did it look so much deeper and scarier than she remembered? Otto pretended to be a narwhal, making Una laugh. Admittedly, her new treasure hunting goggles she had invented were funny looking, but they were also her best shot at reaching the crown. See those goggles she invented? She dove to the bottom of the murky rift. That's when Una noticed something she couldn't see from above. A bridge. A bridge made from a crate, a rock, and the very same plank that plunked her on the head. And it led straight to the crown. But what was that rumbling sound? It grew louder and louder. The ocean floor shook, and the water around Una churned into a thick stew of swirling sand and sea creatures. She couldn't see. She felt trapped. Would the hungry rift gobble her up too? Through the commotion, Una heard something else in the distance. It was faint, but comforting and familiar. The whales. Una sang along until the rumbling stopped and the water cleared. Finally, this was her chance. Una held her breath. Ready, steady, aim. Clink! Hooray! Look at that. She got it. We did it, Una cheered, placing the crown on her best friend. It really is beautiful, she gushed. But these, Una said excitedly, holding up her new goggles, these are spectacular. Otto agreed, because sometimes the best treasure in the world isn't found. It's made. The end.
Oh, I love that story.
Thank you. Thank
Love
you.
it. Now, I
Yeah.
know we have lots of questions coming in, but before we get to the questions, I just have to ask, what is the future for Una? Is it a start of a series?
Well, it's funny you should ask. Just last week, I turned in the third Una book.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So the second Una book is coming out in January. And the second one is called Una and the Shark. And that's where we get to learn a little bit more about the character here, the hammerhead shark.
Okay.
And it turns out his name is Stanley. And so we learn a little bit about that shark in this second book. And in the third one, I will tell you the title, which is pretty still top secret. And it's called Una in the Arctic. And so we're going to have a whole new setting for Una and Otto. So I'm really excited to see what Riza does with the illustrations in that book. It's going to be beautiful. I just know it.
Oh, I love it. Very cool. All right. Well, I think we want to get to some of these questions that are popping up here.
Speaking of popping up, I popped up so I can ask the questions that have been coming in. So our first question is from Marion, and she wants to know, Kelly, what is the favorite book of yours that you've written?
Oh my goodness.
Your favorite of your own books.
Right. You know, I get asked this question a lot. Almost every school visit I go to, kids ask me the same thing. They want to know if I have a favorite book. And I really and truly don't. They're all my babies. And I love them all for different reasons. Some of them I may just really love the art. Some I might love what the story has meant to other kids. Like I wrote a book number of years ago, can't believe it's been 14 years, but a book called Grace for President, right? And this story has inspired a lot of kids, particularly little girls, thinking about maybe growing up to be president one day. And so that makes this book really special. So they're all special to me in their own way, but I really and truly don't have one favorite book. But that's okay if you guys out there have a favorite Kelly DiPucchio book. That's awesome.
Well, Timmy wants to know if you have, like, who do you like to read or what books do you read?
Oh my gosh. Well, I pretty much only read children's like middle grade novels, young adult novels. Once in a while, I will read a grown-up book, but I really think of middle grade and YA as really everybody books, just like I think of picture books as everybody books. And so, yeah. And again, asking an author to pick a favorite book or author is like impossible. But I pretty much absorb all of the children's genres and just kind of live in that world. Because really, I find a lot of inspiration from, even if it's a middle grade novel, I just get inspired by really great writers. And so I pretty much exclusively read in those genres.
So this is an interesting question. How do you handle it as the author if you feel that the illustrations don't work with what you've written?
Yeah. When I first started doing this many, many years ago, it was kind of hard for me to let go of that process. I had written the story. And of course, when you write any story, every story, you have pictures in your head because that's just, how your mind works. And then you get the sketches from the artist and it's completely different. So I learned a long time ago to just let go of that. And I find that the illustrators bring so much more to the story than I could even imagine, because even though I do like to dabble in art, I am a word person. I am very much a word person. And so it's always really exciting to see how somebody takes the words and runs with them. But if there is something that I have an issue with, or I don't think is quite right, I can certainly address that with my editor, and they will kind of be the middle person to sort that out. But that doesn't happen very often. It would kind of have to be a situation where I really felt strongly about it, because I trust that, this is what they're doing. And a picture book is a shared art. It's, words and pictures. And so, so it doesn't happen very often. But like I said, if it does happen, I can certainly address the issue. And it's up to the artist whether or not, they agree,
So here's another one. Did your experience growing up in the Detroit area impact or influence your books, which, we're the Metro Detroit Book and Author Society. We're all in Michigan. You're in Michigan. Do you bring any Michigan elements into the books?
Oh, let me think about that. In general, I would say that, unless you consider the fact that, in Michigan, we, have a lot of the animal stories that I do, but I don't do any nonfiction. So that's not really an element that I explore, although I have done some nonfiction manuscripts. It's something I don't generally do. The closest I got to that was the book that Jen mentioned with the Sandwich Swap, which was a book that I co-authored with Queen Rania of Jordan. And it's a fiction book, but it's based on a true story from her childhood. And so that's probably as close as I got to that. But as far as Michigan, no. Although, like I said, I'm born and bred in Michigan. I go all over the country and I talk to kids about, Michigan, and I always show them our map, and kids are always really impressed when they don't live in Michigan that we have our own little map, and I don't forget the UP.
So here's a question from Arwa. He wants to know, is it easy to think up a book?
Is it easy to think of a book? Honestly, it is easy, because I always say, do you love something? Do you love space? Do you love dirt bikes? Do you love horses? Do you love cars? Whatever it is that you love, you can find a story idea there. And I always tell kids, start there, start with the things that are interesting to you. And for some kids, that is nonfiction. Like my son always loved nonfiction books, particularly books about history. And so now he's getting his PhD in history. And so that was definitely what he loved. And so, yeah, that's what I always tell kids, look for your ideas in the things that you love. And that's why I've written a lot of books about, things that like mermaids, which wasn't my idea, but I wrote a story about a Yeti because I just love mythical creatures and I love that kind of fantasy element. That's always fun for me. I have a book coming out in October about mice, because believe it or not, I love it. I mostly like the imaginary mice, not necessarily mice that would be in my house, but this is a story about little mice. So yeah, so that's what I would tell you is it's easy to find ideas if you have things that you're interested in that you love.
Well, here's another question. And actually, Arwa is not Arwa, it's she, and she's Aisha. So I want to make sure I say that. And then she wants to know if it's easy to make characters. So I know you talked about stories, but how about characters like Una?
Well, yeah. And a lot of stories do begin with a character, and then the storyline or the plot kind of grows from that character. I have that book, of course, Grace for President, right? So here's a little girl who's the main character, and she asks a question. And so her question is, where are the girls when she sees a poster of all the American presidents, right? So we have a character who asks a question, and that one question inspires this whole story. So characters can definitely lead you on journeys. I wrote a book called Gaston about a French bulldog. And this story was really inspired by the character. The character became the first part of it because I love French bulldogs. I don't have one of my own because my husband has allergies, but so I was imagining a story about a French bulldog, and I thought, what if I had a story about a French bulldog who grows up with a family of French poodles? Again, sometimes I ask myself the questions, and that will inspire the story to kind of be built around the character. So so again, creating characters is just what would be interesting to you? What do you find fascinating, or what do you find funny? And then just kind of, listen to your character, let them tell you what their story is or what their problem is, right? A lot of stories have problems, and then you go from there.
And then another question from Mary, and she wants to know if you would ever write chapter books for older readers.
I've actually started a few different chapter books, and that really is my goal. I may do like a young chapter book, but I've started a few different ones, and I just haven't found the one with the spark, right? The spark we talked about. And so I haven't finished them, and I think I kind of get lost in the middle. And so that's really something that I still need to overcome, my fear of failure. I think that happens to everyone. And the reality is some people just don't write across all different genres. And so often if I'm working on a chapter book, I find then somewhere along the way, I'll find a new picture book idea. And I'm like, oh, this is a great idea. And then I go and work on that because that's where I'm comfortable. And that's where I shine. And so I kind of go back to that. So we'll see. Maybe one day I will finish one. If I do, great. If I don't, that's fine too.
Oh, the question just came in. What's your dog's name? Because your dog is
that one that keeps popping in. That is Pearl. And she's my one female dog. And she knows how to work me. Let me tell you, if I'm ever on the phone talking to somebody, she comes around, she does this little begging thing, which she thinks is really cute. And tries to get treats out of me just so that she'll go away.
Well, the follow-up is her pet bed an oyster?
Right.
So here's a serious question. There's been some talk that authors and perhaps publishers don't like libraries because libraries the the argument is that libraries negatively impact book sales because people check out books from the library instead of buying them. As an author, what do you think about that?
Oh, wow. Libraries were my saving grace growing up because we didn't have a lot of money and we would always go to the library and I would check out stacks and stacks of books. As I mentioned, I was a big reader when I was a kid. And so I would go through these weird phases where like I would only read Westerns or that I would only read mysteries, but I was that kid who, when I found something that I loved, I couldn't get enough of it. And that's the beauty of a library, is that you have that freedom to do that. You could go through a whole, category of books and check them out. And when I ever go to schools, because sometimes schools will do book sales, and there are some kids who say, I don't have a book. And I'm like, well, go to your library. They have my books and you can check them out. And their eyes just light up and they get really excited. And kids often come to me and tell me too that they found my books at the library and they're really excited to share that with me. So they are an invaluable resource for not only children, but for humanity, really and truly. So yes.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure Jen does too. And and libraries, we want to make authors' works available. So just like you said, so if you can't, who can afford every book, and you want to explore all of your interests and have that opportunity to just dive in and spend as much time as you want. So thank you, Kelly, for being our cheerleader.
You're welcome.
So I'm just looking at the questions to make sure that we have everything, because I think we have time for maybe a couple more. Here's another one. Is it easy to get through something that takes a long time without getting bored or just quitting altogether?
That's a great question. Yeah, because sometimes that will happen when I'm writing a story that I might kind of get stuck, and that happens. All writers get writer's block at some point. And for me, I have found really one of the best things to do is just put it aside and give it a break. And maybe I go out for a walk, or sometimes that break can last weeks, sometimes even months before I will revisit it, sometimes even years, where I've had stories that I've kind of had to put aside. And then, I get busy with life and I'm working on other things. And every once in a while, I'll go through my computer files and I will revisit some stories. And sometimes I go like, oh, wow, I love this story. And after I've had that distance, I know I know how to fix this. I know how to get through this. And other times I'll open a file and go, wow, that was really a stinky story. We're going to close that one right back up. But I never throw my stories away. I always save them. But getting stuck and even bored, and I always tell kids this too, if you're getting really bored writing it, you have to consider, well, maybe would other people be bored reading it, so that's just, I always try to tune into my feelings. Not that I have to have fun writing every single story, because it's not all stories are about having fun, but am I feeling something? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling angry? Because if I'm feeling those emotions, then hopefully my reader will feel them too, because that's what we want from our readers. We want them to feel something, right?
So let's see. I just want to make sure I've covered everything. There's two more. And the first is, how do you come up with your titles?
Titles. Yeah, titles are a funny thing, because some stories will come to me first with a title. Like I'll have a great title for a book, like Everyone Loves Bacon, right? And so, and then I kind of will build a story around the title. I wrote a book many years ago called Dino Snores because it had a great title. And so I wrote a story about that. Other times the character will come first. And as I mentioned with Gaston, it was a French bulldog. And so when I was trying to name this character, well, the first French name that came into my head was Gaston, because my oldest daughter was obsessed with Beauty and the Beast when she was a little girl. And so that was the first name that popped into my head, was Gaston. And so I named the French bulldog Gaston. But yeah, titles are important, really, and when you go to your library, a lot of books are shelved this way. So this is a spine, right? And so that's what you see. And so you want to grab grab your reader's attention and try to come up with a title that might pique their interest. 40 Winks is a book, as I mentioned, that's coming out. And that's an old expression about sleep, right? And so I decided to create a family of mice that have 38 children. And so I kind of played off the words, right? The puns and stuff, which I, often do. And so here's just a little sneak peek of this family. People often comment on Gaston, the names in there, Fifi, Foo, Foo, Ooh La La, Gaston. Well, in this one, I name all 38 children. And so it's so much fun to read. I cannot tell you how much fun. Jen, you will love reading this one. Wilma, Winky, Walter, Stinky, Itty Bitty Boo, Gabby, Gubby, Tiny, Chubby, Stella, Little Stew, Larry, Lucky, Lulu, Bucky, Meanie, Miny, Mo, Tucker, Tipper, Scooter, Skipper, Freckles, Farley, Flo. That's as far as I've gotten. I have to memorize more.
Wow.
But I have a little bit of time to work on that.
That's awesome. The last question that was asked is, how do your characters become stuffed animals, stuffies? I think you have somebody behind you.
Yeah. Oh, by magic. It's just magic. Before I published my first book, I would sometimes see the plushies, of like Lily in the plastic purse and Clifford and all these little things. And it was like this dream, like, oh my gosh, can you imagine someday having a plushie of your character? And again, I didn't dare to dream that big. I just never imagined that would be something that would happen in my career. And so, and it did. And I had really very little to do with it other than it was magical. And Christian Robinson is I should have mentioned, a wonderful, amazing illustrator of Gaston and Antoinette, among many, many other books. And so this dog kind of became this kind of iconic character in terms of sitting in the chair and stuff. So there was just a company that's what they do. They make, literary plushies. And so they just fell in love with Gaston and turned him into a little stuffy.
Oh,
and
so
in this
great.
case, a big stuffy. There's a little one and then there's a big one.
That is so great. Well, those are all the questions. So I'm going to step away for just a minute and let the two of you wrap up, and then I'll come back and close us out.
Thank you.
All right. So I have to ask, do you have a favorite place that you like to write? Some people feel inspired in different areas. Do you write at home? Do you have a special spot outside that you like to write? What inspires you? Where do you feel the most inspired?
When I'm originally coming up with ideas, a lot of times I do love to sit outside. And I find the inspiration from nature and just the peacefulness of being outdoors. A lot of my serious writing happens right here in my office because I have my computer. But those are early drafts where I use notebook and pen or paper. Like I just scribble my notes and I listen to the story in my head and I really try to get out of my own way. That's really the best way for me to do that. And so I stay away from the computer when I'm at that stage. So that can happen anywhere. I've written stories on airplanes before. I've written stories in, coffee shops. I'll sometimes have to pull over on the side. And if I hear a story in my head, like sometimes they'll come to me in rhyme and you don't want to forget that. So I will jot it down on even like a gum wrapper from my purse or something, So really those early drafts can start anywhere, but I really don't have a favorite place. It's just wherever the ideas are coming to me, I'll take it.
Of course. So what would be the most important tip that you can give to kids who would like to be an author someday?
Well, the most important advice I could give you is to read, read. And I know that sounds very basic, but honestly, I learned from every book that I read. And they inspire me in all different ways. And so, you can keep a little journal and, write down the things that you loved about a book or what you didn't like about a book. Sometimes that's just as helpful. And because, when you read a lot of books, you tend to forget over time, like, all the details and stuff. So if you can kind of keep a record of it, then when you're writing your own stories, you can go back and say, oh, I really loved this about this story. And I wonder if there's a way to incorporate that element into my own story. So that's really helpful. So yeah, and like I hear sometimes from kids, well, I don't like to read. And so I just say to them, you haven't found, the right thing. And that's where libraries are so fantastic, because you can choose from so many different things, right? You can go and look at a graphic novel. Maybe that's where you really love to read, is graphic novels, or the nonfiction, like I mentioned. So it's just finding what you love and finding the genre that's appropriate for you, and finding the inspiration in those books.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we wrap up today, do you want to share anything that you have coming up before we go?
Well, I didn't quite really mention the new book that just came out. This is my newest title, called Not Yeti, and Claire Keene is the illustrator. And I really love this story because it's really about how we make the world a better place by our small acts of kindness, little things that we can do. The first line in the book, which I wrote a few years ago, but was really kind of relevant in recent years, is the world is full of monsters. And so it's about a Yeti who's very kind and very gentle, and how he makes a difference in the world just by being himself, and which is a pretty nice guy. So I wanted to mention that one, and also to going back to the Book Beat, who they will be selling books, and I'm going to be popping in sometime Thursday morning to autograph books. So if you are a person who wanted a book signed, maybe you have a birthday party coming up and you want to give a gift to someone, or a baby shower, and you want it personalized, or for yourself, and you can leave a note with the Book Beat, and I'm sure they're going to keep some kind of list. And so when I go in, I'm going to sign those and personalize them. And so I just wanted to share that as well.
Yay. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, Kelly.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And Kelly, I want to thank you too. I can't wait to read Not Yeti, but I really also want to read 40 Wings, because I want to learn all the names and sing the song.
It is so much fun. And, the last page, after, because I know kids are really quick and they learn so fast. And so one of the last page it doesn't list their names, but it says, how many winks can you name? So they're not named, but they are in order. So kids could go along and name them eventually. But yeah, so Lita Judge, I have shout out to Lita, who's the illustrator. My goodness, what a task she had in creating all these different mice and giving them unique personalities and characteristics. And so, yeah, what an undertaking that must have been for her.
Well, I hope you'll come back and see us, because maybe we can sing the song together. Maybe I will have learned it better.
That would be a lot of fun.
There we go.
It would be wonderful to have you back. And I really appreciate you being with us today and being such a wonderful guest. And just it really enhances, I think, the whole summer reading experience for libraries, to be able to talk to such a wonderful author. But I'm trying to think of my words. So kids, I lose words sometimes too. But just somebody who writes the books that we love. I always am so awestruck that when I get to talk to someone who writes a book that I love. So thank you. I mean,
well, I truly am the lucky one in this, that I'm doing what I love, and I get to share these stories with kids everywhere, and grown-ups as well. And so I'm really fortunate and really happy to be here this evening to share these stories with you and to meet everyone. And so thank you.
Oh, yeah, no, we will have you back. And I also want to thank Jen Taggert for being our special secret weapon, and just taking the time to help us out with this interview. And we hope you will come back and see us again too.
My pleasure.
Excellent.
Thank you,
So-
Jen.
So
Thank
for
you.
everybody watching or listening or watching on Facebook Live, we want to thank you for coming too. It was great to have so many people signed up, especially so many kids. And we really appreciate and love all the questions. So thank you for helping to make the program even better with all of your great questions. And I hope, I think I can speak for all of us here, that we hope that you'll keep reading and visit your library, because I can say for all the people who work in libraries, we're always so glad to see you. So come by and see us. And don't forget, if you want to purchase any of Kelly's books, they're available at BookBeat in Oak Park, or you can purchase online at thebookbeat.com. And we did put information about that in the chat. And if you purchase between now and Thursday, Kelly will personalize that for you. So what that means, so Aisha, you were asking some great questions. If you want Kelly to write your name in a book, she'll do that for you. So anyway, so with that, I will say thank you all once more for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful evening, and everybody just keep reading. So
That's right.
have a great night.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.